The crowd at the local street fair bustled with energy, laughter mixing with the sizzling aroma of food trucks. Ava Novak squeezed through the throng, her eyes darting toward the far end of the park. She wasn't here for the fun. Her hands clenched around a crumpled note stuffed in her jacket pocket, a message she wasn't supposed to ignore. Her heart sank as she saw him, Marcus Hale, standing too comfortably under the glow of carnival lights. The man seemed to draw darkness to himself, despite the cheerful surroundings. Dressed sharply in black, he cut through the ambience like a blade. When their eyes met, he smiled, a predator's smile. "You're late," Marcus said as she approached, his voice calm, but with an edge sharp enough to slice through steel. "I had to work," Ava replied, matching his gaze though her stomach churned. She refused to show fear, even when every instinct screamed at her to run. Marcus gestured for her to follow. The festive atmosphere seemed to evaporate as he led her toward a quiet alley near the parking lot. "You know why I called," he said, turning to face her, the casual tone of his voice a chilling contradiction to the menace in his eyes. "Your father made promises. Promises he couldn't keep. Now you're going to pay." Ava's blood ran cold, but she steeled herself. "I don't have anything left to give you." Marcus chuckled softly, leaning closer. "Oh, but you do, Ava. Your life, your choices, they're mine now." Ava's heart pounded as Marcus stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. She stood her ground, masking the fear clawing at her chest. "I don't owe you anything," she spat, hoping her defiance would mask her vulnerability. Marcus tilted his head, amused. "Oh, Ava, this isn't about what you owe me. It's about what you'll do to protect your precious little brother." Her breath caught. "Ethan has nothing to do with this." Marcus smirked, pulling out his phone. He swiped the screen and turned it toward her. Ava's stomach dropped as she saw Ethan, blissfully unaware, walking home from his job at the local grocery store. "You're lying," she whispered, her voice trembling despite her attempt to sound strong. "Am I?" Marcus pocketed the phone and leaned in, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "You know I don't bluff. The boy's life is in your hands now. Work for me, or he won't have one." Ava felt trapped, the weight of the moment suffocating her. She clenched her fists, anger sparking beneath her terror. "What do you want?" Marcus stepped back, his grin widening. "It's simple. You're going to help me with a little business. No questions, no resistance. Do as I say, and your brother stays safe. Fail, and—" "Fine," Ava interrupted, her voice firm despite the lump in her throat. "I'll do it." "Smart girl." Marcus reached into his pocket, pulling out a small envelope. He pressed it into her hand. "Your first assignment. Do not open this until you're alone." Without another word, he turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving Ava standing under the flickering light of the street lamp, her world spinning. Back at home, the silence of the Novak household felt deafening. Ethan had already gone to bed, blissfully unaware of the storm Ava had just stepped into. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at the envelope in her trembling hands. When she finally tore it open, her heart sank. Inside was a photograph of a man in his late 30s and an address scribbled hastily on a note. Underneath it were chilling instructions: get close, get the intel, report back in 3 days. Ava pressed her palm to her forehead, panic washing over her. She didn't know who the man was or why Marcus wanted her involved, but she couldn't refuse. Ethan's life hung in the balance. The next morning, Ava stood outside a nondescript office building, clutching a stack of resumes. She'd followed Marcus's instructions, applying for a temp job at the company where the man from the photo worked. Every fiber of her being screamed that this was a bad idea, but she couldn't think of another way out. The receptionist gave her a once-over and gestured for her to wait. Minutes later, a tall man with sharp features and a confident stride approached her. It was him, the man from the photo. "Ms. Novak," he asked, extending a hand. "I'm Julian Gray. We've been reviewing your application, and I think we could use someone like you on our team." Ava forced a smile, shaking his hand. The warmth of his grip felt at odds with the cold dread in her stomach. "Thank you," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "I'm ready to start right away." Little did Julian know, Ava's presence in his life wasn't by chance. Over the next 2 days, Ava's unease grew. Julian was nothing like she expected. He was kind, approachable, and deeply invested in his work, which seemed to center on social outreach programs. The more she learned about him, the less he fit the mold of someone who would be on Marcus's radar. But Ava's orders were clear. She was to monitor him, gain his trust, and deliver information back to Marcus. On the 3rd day, Marcus called. Well, his voice was as sharp as ever. "There's nothing," Ava said quickly. "He's harmless. Just a businessman." There was a pause. Then Marcus's tone turned icy. "Don't lie to me, Ava. Everyone has secrets. Find his, or Ethan pays the price." The line went dead, leaving Ava feeling more trapped than ever. That night, Ava couldn't sleep. She sat on her bed, staring at her reflection in the cracked mirror. Every moment with Julian replayed in her mind, each one gnawing at her conscience. She knew she had to make a choice. Either she would betray an innocent man, or she would risk her brother's life. As dawn broke, Ava's resolve hardened. She wasn't going to let Marcus control her life any longer. But defying him meant walking a razor's edge. And the stakes had never been higher. The following day, Ava arrived at Julian's office earlier than usual. She had spent the night devising a risky plan, one that could expose Marcus without endangering Ethan. But first, she needed to know why Marcus had targeted Julian. Julian greeted her with his usual warm smile. "Morning, Ava. You're here early." "I wanted to get a head start," Ava replied, forcing a cheerful tone. She clutched her notebook tightly, concealing the unease bubbling under her calm exterior. As the hours passed, Ava carefully sifted through files while keeping an eye on Julian. His phone buzzed periodically with calls and messages, and she noted how his expression darkened during one particular conversation. "I told you, I'm not backing down," Julian said, his tone firm. "The project stays on track." Ava leaned closer, pretending to adjust the papers on her desk, and caught fragments of his conversation. Phrases like community funding and land dispute hinted at something much bigger. By lunch, Ava had pieced together enough to suspect that Julian's work was interfering with Marcus's interests. But why would Marcus send her instead of dealing with him directly? Her thoughts were interrupted when Julian approached her desk. "Everything okay?" he asked, his brow furrowed with concern. Ava hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, just try and keep up with everything." "You're doing great," Julian said, his voice softening. "If you need help, just ask." For a moment, Ava saw the genuine kindness in his eyes, and guilt gnawed at her. She couldn't let him become another victim of Marcus's schemes. That evening, Ava slipped out of the office with her bag packed and her plan set in motion. She knew she needed an ally, someone who could help her take down Marcus. Her first thought was Liam Cross, an old friend of her father's who had once worked as a private investigator. Liam's office was a cluttered mess of case files and coffee-stained papers. He looked up from his desk as Ava entered, his sharp eyes narrowing in surprise. "Ava, haven't seen you in years. What's going on?" She hesitated, then spilled everything. The threats, Marcus's hold over her family, and her suspicions about Julian. Liam leaned back in his chair, his expression grim. "Marcus Hale. That name alone gives me a headache. Can you help me?" Ava asked, desperation lacing her voice. Liam nodded. "I'll see what I can dig up. But you need to be careful, Ava. Marcus isn't the kind of man you cross lightly." Over the next few days, Ava played her part at Julian's office while secretly working with Liam. The more she uncovered about Marcus's operation, the clearer the stakes became. Marcus wasn't just extorting Ava. He was using her as a pawn in a much larger game. Liam discovered that Marcus had been pressuring local businesses to sell their land for a shadowy development project. Julian's refusal to comply made him a target. One night, Ava received a call from Liam. "I've got proof," he said. "Financial records, deals gone bad. Everything that ties Marcus to his crimes. But it's not enough. We need something bigger to nail him." Ava's mind raced. The only way to truly bring Marcus down was to get evidence directly from him. It was dangerous, but she was out of options. The next time Marcus called, Ava was ready. "Did you find what I asked for?" he demanded. "I found something better," Ava replied, keeping her voice steady. "Julian's on to you. He's planning to expose everything." There was silence on the line, then a low chuckle. "Is that so? Then I guess it's time I paid him a visit." Ava's stomach churned. She had just set the final phase of her plan into motion. That night, Marcus's black SUV pulled up outside Julian's office. Ava watched from the shadows as Marcus and two of his men entered the building. Her heart raced as she texted Liam, "He's here. Be ready." Inside, Marcus confronted Julian, his demeanor cold and threatening. "You've been a thorn in my side for too long," Marcus said, his voice dripping with malice. Julian stood his ground. "I'm not afraid of you, Marcus. You can't bully everyone into submission." Ava slipped into the building, her phone's camera rolling as she recorded the encounter from the hallway. Liam had alerted the authorities, but it was up to her to make sure they had irrefutable evidence. The confrontation escalated as Marcus revealed his true intentions, detailing his plans to strong-arm Julian and take control of his projects. Ava's heart pounded as she captured every word. But just as Marcus turned to leave, one of his men spotted her. "She's recording," he shouted. Marcus's eyes darkened as he stormed toward her. "Ava, you little—" Before he could finish, the sound of sirens filled the air. Liam had delivered on his promise. Marcus and his men were arrested that night, their operation exposed for all to see. Ava handed over the footage, knowing it would seal his fate. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of freedom. Julian, though shaken, thanked her for her courage. "You didn't have to risk yourself for me," he said. Ava smiled faintly. "Sometimes you have to fight for what's right." The fallout from Marcus's arrest sent shockwaves through the community. His empire crumbled, and Ava was finally free from his grasp. She and Liam worked together to ensure Ethan's safety, and for the first time in a long while, their family could breathe easy. As Ava stood on the steps of the courthouse, watching Marcus led away in handcuffs, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She had faced her fears and emerged stronger. This wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning of a new chapter.